fairly impromptu stream here. I thought whilst I'm fairly fresh from the event and I can remember what I talked about, I might just give a bit of a talk through the things. I'm not sure whether the video from my speech will ever be released, so I thought I might just have a chat through the content that I prepared for that. Before we get started, just a note that I've had a fun idea. I think it would be nice to do some prayer streams from time to time. Maybe just me, or maybe I'll invite someone else on, and we'll pray through things that are relevant for our community. And what I'd love to do is pray for things for individuals. If you have things going on in your life that you're happy to share, and yeah, we can pray together. I do think prayer is powerful and important, and I'd love to encourage that in amongst people who watch this channel. So I'll probably be reaching out to people on Discord to find out if there's prayers that they're happy to share, and maybe I'll make that a thing I do on Sunday afternoons. That might be a nice routine to get into. But yes, this stream, the plan is to just go through, for context, this is a talk that I gave at a conference that was explicitly for an audience that was not assumed to be Christians. And I gave it the title, "What Reactionaries Can Learn from the Bible." And more or less my argument was that that reactionaries needed a source of meaning, both to succeed as individuals, but also as a movement, and that the Bible gave the best possible statement and the best possible answer to this problem. So yeah, we'll go through what I said. There's a bit of a bleak and honest look at the nihilistic reality of the modern world, and hopefully we'll find some bold and exciting answers in the Bible. So, how I began was getting people to discuss some quotes with the people next to them. Obviously, we won't do that here, but I'll read you the quotes, and feel free to drop thoughts in chat for what you think about these quotes. These are all, I'll give you the spoiler up front. These are all quotes from the Bible. Generations come and generations go, but the world just stays the same. A man is not better off than an animal because the world has no meaning for either of them. It is better to be satisfied with what you have than to always be hoping for something else. A working man may or may not have enough to eat, but at least he can get a good night's sleep. A rich man, however, has so much that he stays awake worrying. Don't be too good or too wise. Why kill yourself? But don't be too wicked or too foolish either. Why die before you have to? Fast runners do not always win the races, and the brave do not always win battles. Put your investment in many places because you never know what kind of bad luck you're going to have in this world. I found one man in 1,000 that I could respect, but not one woman. So hopefully those got the thought juices flowing. This being a conference, well, this isn't a conference, but the situation in which I was speaking weekend back was a conference. So I thought I ought to define my terms. What did I mean by reactionary? Well, actually, when I gave my speech, I didn't bother to define reactionary because I went straight after Panama Hat, and he gave a much better definition than what I could have done. We've had one reaction in chat, based. Well, yes, this is what I was trying to do with my quotes, was make people think, there's more in this Bible, more thoughtful stuff, more stuff that seems familiar to what we've been discussing than we might have expected. Yes, Poe, you're also interested in this one man in 1,000 to respect, but not one woman. I admit I put that one in to be a bit provocative, and I've got thoughts about what it actually means. I think it's worth further discussion. but I probably don't want to be sidetracked on it right now. So here's a quote from Chesterton that I think should bring forth the feeling of being a reactionary. This is from Chesterton. There is a narrowness to the new ideas. We must ask for new things because we're not allowed to ask for old things. This whole position is based on the belief that we have all the good out of the old ideas, but we have not got all the good out of them. Perhaps at this moment, we've not got any of the good out of them. There's not really any courage in attacking antiquated things, any more than in offering to fight one's grandmother. The really courageous man is he who fights tyrannies young as the morning and superstitions fresh as the first flowers. There is one metaphor of which the moderns are very fond. They're always saying, you cannot put the clocks back. The simple and obvious answer is, you can. There is another proverb, you have made your bed, so you must lie in it. Which again is simply a lie. If I have made my bed uncomfortable, I will make it again. So amongst the conference, I think most people would have described themselves in one form or another as reactionary. So if there was any unifying thought, it's probably an assessment that the cumulative political movement that was happening was in a bad direction. The idea that the world is either being led or at least is moving in a way towards bad outcomes. Maybe there's disagreements about the extent to which it's coordinated, and we might not see eye to eye about whether this is a reversible change or how we should respond to it. Maybe some are hoping for a reversal of the change. Maybe we just consider ourselves the sort of Peter Hitchens style obituary writers. This is a part that I skipped because I thought, again, in my speech last weekend, because I thought better to give more time for Q&A, but I may as well elaborate here. So reactionary, the term, of course, originates from the French Revolution, as do the terms right and left wing and conservative. So in French, reactionary denotes this movement that seeks to reverse existing tendencies. In the 18th century, those forces were trying to oppose the progressive, the social, the political, the economic changes that had been brought about by the French Revolution. And they also wanted to restore the authority of the Catholic Church, which was a subject of some discussion last weekend. In the 19th century, reactionary then denoted the people who sort of idealized feudalism, things associated with the pre-modern era, before the Industrial Revolution, before the French Revolution, time when economies were mostly agrarian. There was a landed aristocracy that dominated society. There was a hereditary king that ruled, and yeah, again, the Catholic Church being the moral center of society. So those who were labeled reactionary at that time were in favor of the aristocracy rather than the middle class and the working class. So reactionaries at that time opposed democracy and parliamentarianism. And yeah, it was the parliamentary forces that were opposing the monarchy. So back during the revolution, that was the left and right wings. So the 19th century is the continuation, of course, of what was going on in the 18th century. By the 20th century, the proponents of socialism and communism had started using this term reactionary in a polemic way to label their enemies. So in Marxist terminology, reactionary is just this pejorative adjective which they use to denote people whose ideas might appear to be socialist, but in their opinion contain these elements of feudalism, capitalism, nationalism, fascism. So it's a you're not socialist enough type of label. Reactionary feelings at that time were often coupled with a hostility to modern industrial means of production and people who had a nostalgia for a more rural society. And so in our discourse in the last few years, some people have come to criticize the use of the term reactionary as using the language of the enemy. That is to say, the left talk about things being reactionary as a pejorative term all the time. So if we label ourselves as reactionary, we're just assuming the identity that we've been given. Although the term reactionary itself is much older than its recent coinage. Somebody's jumping into this stream having immediately just finished the NRX chat. There's some crossover, so maybe there's a natural connection between those things. So to just jump off that reference to NRX, so neo-reactionary, this term that's associated with people like Moldbug, and as with so many terms in these spheres, it's been a powerful coinage in terms of sparking new discussion and starting a discourse. On the other hand, when you closer analyze it, does it fall apart? Perhaps so. I mean, neo as a prefix, as I mentioned on that stream, gives the impression that because it's new, it's good. Neo whatever means the old thing, but up to date with brand new, exciting ideas added on, which is a little counter to the reactionary instinct, which is to say older things are better. So it's an oxymoron, and probably deliberately so. And I don't know whether the neo in neo-reactionary is supposed to be a sort of like a sugar pill. It's a wrapping to bring people with a modern mind towards reactionary thinking, or is it that the neo is the core and there's a reactionary gloss around, so we're going to move forwards but with incorporating some reactionary elements? Not entirely clear. So that's reaction. What about the Bible? Well, of course, I'm talking about the scriptures that are held sacred amongst those who follow the teachings of Jesus. Which writings are included in that set? I mean, none of the books were written by Jesus. So people will argue about the canon, and this is one of the accusations against Christianity, that it's arbitrary, or the powerful church decided the texts that suited them politically after the fact. Well, actually, the canon emerged rather quickly, and I just want to give a quick sketch of where what we consider to be canon came from. First, just to say the Old Testament, or what it is known to the Jews as the Tanakh, they were already in place at the time of Christ. There were two codices. For a long time, they were our oldest source for the Old Testament: the Aleppo Codex, dated to 920 CE, and the Leningrad Codex, which is dated to 1008 CE. However, these were completely blown out of the water in terms of age when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Mind-blowing discovery, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Go and have a look. So these manuscripts are dated between some of them at 70 CE, or I should say AD. This is even I am affected by modern jargon, CE and BCE. So 70 AD, but some of them are as old as 150 BC. So we've got very old, accurate manuscripts for the Hebrew bit of the Bible. The New Testament is also well attested. In fact, I just want to double down and emphasize how well we have the textual evidence for what the original words of the New Testament are. There's 5,800 complete or fragmentary Greek manuscripts that have been catalogued, 10,000 in Latin and 9,300 in other languages. Some of them are Syriac, Slavic, Gothic, Ethiopian, bits in Coptic and Armenian. Armenian. But remember the number 5,800. And also remember that the dates of these manuscripts go back as early as 125 AD. And even some papyrus, some fragments of John, I think, go back to 52 AD. Okay, let's compare that to some other historical documents. Homer's Iliad, which is the history of the Trojan War, has only 1,752 manuscripts and is dated 400 years after the events. So it was written 800 BC. It's older than the New Testament, and the earliest copies that we have are dated from 400 BC. That's probably the second best after the Bible in terms of like ancient historical manuscripts and having lots of copies. But it's an order of magnitude less well attested to, but it's still pretty good. Aristotle's work, we've got 1,000 manuscripts that are dated to 1,200 years after the events. So, they were written mid 300s BC, and the earliest copies are in the middle of the 850s AD. Tacitus, there's 33 manuscripts, right? 33 compared to, remember, it was 5,800. And those are dated 750 years after the events, right? If you're a historian, you just expect not to have manuscripts that are that close and not to have that many of them. So it's remarkable we've got the record we have of the New Testament. But nobody questions whether we have Tacitus. It's not really a discussion. We just assume that Tacitus we've got more or less well preserved. Thucydides is 50 manuscripts and 1,300 years after the events. So I don't know if it's worth going into all the details. But that was written, sometime in the mid sort of 450 BC, and our earliest copy was dated to 900 AD. So we've got, I think it's fair to say, the accurate manuscripts, and there are very slight questions about what the original Greek text was. Occasionally, there'll be textual variants that affect a word. It sometimes affects a sentence. Very rarely will it affect the meaning of a paragraph, almost never. And someone's pointing out we're missing quite a lot of Tacitus. Yeah. And am I responding to atheists? This is the part of my speech which got a little bit of kickback because, I'm claiming the historical accuracy of the Bible, not just that it's our lineage as the West. But yeah, so we know really accurately that we have the original texts of the Bible. That's not to say necessarily that the people who wrote it were telling the truth. You'd have to provide further supporting arguments for that, and I probably don't have time to go into that. But just as far as, is it original or is it a later forgery? The later forgery idea, the sort of Dan Brown concepts were all really laughable, and no serious, even skeptical scholars even consider or entertain those ideas. Those sort of silly, childish concepts. So Irenaeus is an interesting chap who was writing around 180 AD. He wrote this piece called Against Heresies, kind of knocking backs. And the Gnostics were saying that salvation is available through a secret knowledge that's only available to a few. And Irenaeus, meanwhile, was contending that the true doctrines of the Christian faith are the same ones that are being taught by bishops, all in different areas. So do we go after secret knowledge, or do we just stick to the mainstream thing that's being taught to everybody? The Gnostics said secret knowledge is necessary, and Irenaeus was batting back against that. And he gave this lovely quote talking about the Gospels. So the Gospels being the 4 books that talk about the life of Jesus. And he said, "It is not possible that the Gospels can be either more or fewer in number than they are. For since there are 4 quarters of the earth in which we live, and 4 universal winds, while the church is scattered through all the world, and the pillar and the ground of the church is like the gospel and the spirit of life, it is fitting that she should have 4 pillars breathing out immortality on every side and vivifying men afresh." Irenaeus himself cites from most of the New Testament canon, as well as a couple of non-canonical works, 1 Clement, and the Shepherd of Hermes. And he makes no reference to Philemon, 2 Peter, 3 John, or Jude. So 4 of the very shortest epistles in the New Testament he doesn't mention, and he quotes from 2 others that didn't end up in canon. But that is to say, apart from those slight quibbles, he was already considering the books that we consider canon for the New Testament to be the canon. And that was in 180 AD, incredibly early, not long after the last of the books had been written, frankly. So there was a good measure of debate in the early church over the New Testament canon, but the major books were all accepted by almost all Christians by about the middle of the 3rd century. So there's this core of biblical books which were accepted by all the Christians from a very early date. And then there's just a few books over which there is some amount of debate. And that's how we got the canon. And that's what I consider to be the Bible. So we know what reactionary means. We know what the Bible means. The core argument that I was there to make was that the right needs the Bible to give it meaning. And what I've been surprised by recently is that this argument has actually been being made for me to a large extent. I've heard it from lots of people who aren't Christians. They've been saying things like, language like evil is missing from our tool set. Well, why is it missing? Where did it go? When did our language lose these powerful terms and become deracinated and weak? And I'd argue that it's a side effect of the Enlightenment. Yes, the Enlightenment, during which we really moved, I would argue, into darkness. This was a useful quote that I found from a Morgoth video. Morgoth, by the way, doesn't consider himself religious, but he said this: "The tools handed to us by liberalism just don't cut it. It's like we're facing machine gun and holding a stick. You see, people trying to present the facts and the data, and it just finding it doesn't work. This is why there's going to be a return to religion, because I don't see anything about a liberalistic mindset that can survive in a society which is going to go through what we're going to face. What are you going to be bringing to the fight without a return to a different way of thinking entirely, ontologically? It seems to me that it doesn't matter what it is, there's a God-shaped hole that reasonable people in the West are looking for. What's motivating the other side is not reason. You can only describe it as evil. This kind of thinking was born mainly out of the Enlightenment, but for hundreds of years, Christianity was doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the West. Even in the 1950s, a lot of this was around. So let's consider this challenge of finding an ethic. As Morgoth mentions, our society, and even some of us, we're working with these tools that were forged in the Enlightenment in a positivist, empiricist analysis. We have to believe that the only things that we can actively believe are those that we can probe through experimentation. And through this process, we can uncover truths about reality, but it leaves us with many of the claimed truths which we can't experiment on. We can't do positivist methodology to reach. We have to be generous, agnostic, but many people take the stance of assume false until proven otherwise. But how far does this technique actually take us if we're applying it to the world of morality? Nowhere whatsoever, argues David Hume. And so here's a quote from David Hume. "For as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, it is necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time that a reason should be given for what seems altogether inconceivable, how this new relation can be a deduction from others which are entirely different from it." I don't know if that paragraph is entirely clear on first hearing it. But what he's expressing is the is-ought gap. We can find out what is, but you cannot, from a set of is statements, create a statement that contains the word ought. There's no view that one state of being is better or should be strived for. The state in which everybody's being tortured is as much an is as a situation where everyone's having a great life, or any other comparison between two is. There's no way to build a view that one is better or should be striven for. And actually, David Hume's solution to this was, he didn't think that moral judgments were nonsense, but he thought that they came from sentiments or feelings, but not from logical deductions. He wrote, "Morality is more properly felt than judged of, though this feeling or sentiment is so commonly soft and gentle that we're apt to confuse it with an idea, according to our common custom of taking all things for the same which have a near resemblance for each other." But are any of us actually happy to live in such an ontology? When we see an evil act, do we honestly believe that our reaction is nothing more than distaste? Can we truly imagine stepping outside of our subjective viewpoint and being so emotionally unmoved by, say, rape and murder of innocent and good people? Is it even possible to construct a society in which it is known amongst its elites that there's a deep sort of arbitrary nature to the goodness that we're working towards? Would it work if the people on top knew full well that the goodness that they're trying to set up is completely at random and doesn't have any deep truth or reality? When we see children who are being gaslit, or even forced in some cases to take medicines which are known to damage their bodies, and the only reason for it is to give their parents social plaudits, do we just see this as a subjective difference of opinion? Or is our mindset properly that this is an objective evil? I don't think I need to give more examples. I think everyone listening to this will know it in their bones. And let's consider something that's maybe hits closer to home, because I think some of us have also fallen for this reductionistic moral ontology ourselves. That is to say, some of us have lived under a false moral god. How often has our moral analysis terminated at line go up, right? This is the danger of trying to construct our own moral ontology from scratch. When we've got this blind assumption that economic growth works as just as this unchallengeable heuristic, how many of our problems personally go away if we're given money? And indeed, how many of our woes are caused in pursuit of it? But consider this. In recent times, we've come to realize that the material advantage that we have over previous generations actually often turns out to be a curse. The wealth of entertainment makes us intellectually inert. The wealth of comfort makes us physically incapable. Our great wealth in food just makes us obese and satisfied. Our new communication technology, has it not left us without real friends? We have this new industrial technology, but it's left us without real jobs. We have this new governmental technology, and so often we're found without real freedoms. But is there anything truer than this, my friends? We have this wealth of religious options, and yet we're spiritually adrift. So what do we do with this analysis? So much of our effort is towards securing our present and future material prospects. If we now see this danger and prosperity, do we turn to just burn the system to the ground? I think we've looked into the abyss of liberalism for long enough, I can kind of hear nihilism approaching on the horizon. Now, is all of this just a modern idea and it's a complete new challenge to thinking? Have we, along with Nietzsche, thought our way beyond religion and beyond God? Well, let me suggest, not even close. And let me read you a couple of passages from Ecclesiastes, which should challenge everybody from the self-satisfied Gen X Daria to the inspired but insipid, ultimately, Christian liberals. What has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already, in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves which were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than to any being before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and of provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delights of sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, that I had expired in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Let me pause there. This is a clear statement in Ecclesiastes of the problem that many of us have discovered in materialism. There's no real value to it. As soon as you achieve anything in this life, you just move on to the next target. The actual meaning was an illusion. We have a goal and we feel dissatisfied because we haven't reached it. And then once we've reached it, we feel dissatisfied because we no longer have a goal. This is a problem that people are saying in our circles as if it's a new discovery, but it's stated much better in Ecclesiastes than what I can say. And it's stated as somebody who actually tried it and found this to be the case. And in many ways, it's only those who achieve their goals who can turn around and warn everybody else, don't put your hopes in your goals. You think that when you get £1 million, suddenly you'll be happy? So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my efforts and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave it and all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest, and this too is meaningless. So perhaps people think that they can move on from the childish concept of buying the Lamborghini and the mansion, and then they'll be happy. But they say, no, true meaning is in is in making an inheritance for my children and passing it on, and I can actually achieve immortality through my wealth. In one day, the things that I've stocked up will accumulate and accumulate, and maybe somewhere down the line it becomes something that has real meaning. But even looking beyond your own death to your legacy, it all disappears in the end. We can criticize people for short-term thinking and say, did you really enjoy that? Did you enjoy that waste of money that you just did? Wouldn't it have been better to save? Wouldn't it have been better to build up? Isn't there wisdom? But what's the ultimate end? Isn't in the span of eternity, everything's short term. All that we can do in our lives will disappear into dust. Isn't this an interesting perspective to find in the Bible? Isn't there something that people are still discovering at this very moment? We feel like we've been lied to by society, by this dream of line go up and meaninglessness. But it's all been here. It's the whole time. It's been here for thousands of years in the Bible. But let's carry on and see what else the Bible says about where meaning can be found. Let me pause and see what chat's saying first, though. Harrison says, I'm saddened you didn't bring out the suit or the 3D camera for this, but this is more personal. That's true. Well, I tell you, this is a very ad hoc stream. I decided to do it because I fancied it this afternoon. Sigyn says, Sigyn? I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. The more wholesome secular values say family and friends matter, not stuff, but it is still only the pleasure that you get from them. Yeah, I don't know. I've posted a bunch of quotes from Ecclesiastes. I don't know whether any of them directly address this. More or less, the message in Ecclesiastes is it is fine to find happiness in things in the short term, and there is happiness to be had in even things like eating and drinking and working and so on. But the question is, what's the ultimate eternal meaning in it? And it's not true. There isn't. So this bit says, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand over to the one who pleases God. And this too is a meaningless chasing after the wind. Now, I don't think people realize that this verse is in the Bible. You can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in your own toil. That seems not spiritual. What I'm saying is the Bible has interesting stuff that requires thinking about. And I probably don't have time to go into the full explanation for how depth and thought that can be had by reading the Bible that is directly applicable to the topics that we're discussing. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Again, the wisdom that you get from reading the Bible will positively affect your life, regardless of if you believe the deeper spiritual truths. These are the two arguments I'm making in my speech. On the one hand, wisdom in the Bible for everybody. On the other hand, deep spiritual importance. And I'll come back onto the second point later. But just consider this. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. But then fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. These two verses are next to each other in Ecclesiastes. But aren't they saying the opposite things to each other? One is saying it's a fool who folds their hands. And the other one is saying, well, somebody who's full up with toil, they might as well just find tranquility, and they're better to have one handful of tranquility than two with toil. There's wisdom here. It takes time to think through. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The thing that actually sprung to mind just when I was reading that is this Say's law? As goods increase, so do those who consume them. Is this not supply creates its own demand? Well, anyway, the sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. The Bible turns out to be quite carrot-pilled. Would you want sweet sleep? Perhaps laboring, and this would have meant physical laboring, is a gift, and being rich is a curse. There's deep ideas here. I have seen grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these. The righteous person perishing in their wickedness. The righteous person perishing in their righteousness, and the wicked living long in their wickedness. Do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. I think we've seen some very provocative and strong statements so far in Ecclesiastes. So we can both consider deep, provocative, controversial, counter cultural ideas, but also avoid extremes. And there's definitely a tendency amongst people in reactionary circles to take things to ridiculous extremes, where nothing is good that has been produced in the last X years, and that X grows the more reactionary you get. There's also this concept of purity spiraling. Do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? In some ways, for me to continue to elaborate these verses is pointless. They're very clearly stated, and the most value you will get from them is going and thinking about them, meditating on them, applying them to every aspect of your life. I've got about 10 things going through my head for each one of these verses, and I could go through and list them out, and that would probably be thought-provoking for you, but it won't be as helpful and refreshing as if you take one of these verses. Just go to a random bit of Proverbs, open it up and say, Lord, what do you want to teach me? Or if you're not a Christian, open Proverbs and say, what can I learn from this ancient and valuable literature? Wisdom makes one person more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. Now, isn't that a challenge to the way we've been thinking about power? Do we want to become rulers? Or do we want to be wise? And how far can wisdom take us? How do we analyze that? Can we analyze it? Probably the answer is no. Probably the answer is we can become wise and then wiser and then wiser, and look back after many decades and start to get a dim sense of how our initial gaining of wisdom was used and twisted into history and became something more than we could possibly have imagined. Indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what is right and never sins. So there's my Bible verse dump. And believe me, that was only the tip of the iceberg. I could have gone in a million directions. But it's not the simple, sleepy, antiquated morality that you might have expected from the Bible. It's a stinging rebuke to modernity. We've been subjected to a disgusting attempt to round off the corners and to claim that ethics is just this simple concept that's just not true. If we sleepwalk on without something that's strong and specific, a moral code, we leave individuals to an insipid and meaningless existence. there's nothing from a materialistic framework that's meaningful in and of itself. And meanwhile, whilst we're in this mess of moral ambiguity, the powerful will go on, as they always do. They will continue to take advantage of the whole situation, and they will amass wealth for themselves, and they'll go on to do evil schemes of various sorts, whether they enjoy it or not. I mean, don't get me wrong, the passages that I read from Ecclesiastes are not simple to understand. There's not simple answers here. Now listen to this verse, because it's not all rosy news in this speech. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets them over the lowliest of people. Just as God frustrated the hopes of the builders in the Tower of Babel, so God will prevent any earthly kingdom from becoming too overly powerful. I did a bit of research, and I came across a guy called Jim Nelson Black, who's been researching decadence in a modern society. And he's listed a bunch of signs of decay: luxury, skepticism, weariness, superstition, a preoccupation with self, promotion of the wrong people, the urge to overspend, and a rise of liberal opinion, which is the popularization of attitudes and policies controlled by sentiment rather than sound moral judgment. Don't these things sound familiar? But it's familiar in our modern society because we've seen it in previous societies, which are also in decay. If you look in Daniel, there's a vision, and there's this statue that has a head of gold. And it's pretty clear the head of gold is the Babylonian Empire, which was around from 625 to 539 BC. The Babylonians were replaced by the Medo-Persian Empire, who were around from 558 to 330 BC. And on the statue, they were the chest and the arms that were made of silver. Then there was a belly and the thighs that were made out of bronze. And that later turned out to be the Greco-Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great. And that was around from 333 BC to sort of 31 BC. And most recently fell so yes, quite clear to historians. I'm not a historian, so I'm told that this is not controversial, which is which. But you've got then, what is it, toes of iron, which perhaps is the Roman Empire. Point being, nation after nation rises up and falls. Maybe side point being, the quality of each empire appears to be lower than the previous one. So the head was gold, and then the materials become less and less valuable as you go down the statue. Job 12:23 says, "He makes nations rise and then fall, builds some up and abandons others." So from a biblical and Christian perspective, you wouldn't expect nations to last forever. You wouldn't expect them to come towards a utopian vision. You wouldn't hope for revival in government. You would know that you're living through a collapsing world that's in pain, as in the pain of childbirth. And you wouldn't look for salvation in politics. And again, these are ideas that have been echoed in neo-reactionary and reactionary thought. At other times during the conference, I heard these ideas, but maybe they're just repeating ideas that are already in the Bible. Anything that they say that's true. I mean, is there anything new under the sun? That was the first verse I quoted from Ecclesiastes. So I'm going to argue, no, all these ideas have already been come up with. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly, for it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the earth. So, for those people listening now who are not Christians, but resonate with some of this, how do you feel about Psalm 94? The Lord is a God who avenges. O God who avenges, shine forth. Rise up, O judge of the earth. Pay back to the proud what they deserve. How long, Lord, how long will the wicked be jubilant? I think all of us instinctively understand the need for righteous judgment. When we think about the wicked, especially the wicked in power that we want dethroned, we want a good God to turn to cry to. And the good news in the Bible is there is that ultimate hope for good triumphing, certainly in the end. Now, I also threw in a few verses, and I'm sure I could have found 100 more, but I thought I'd just throw in some that point out following the Bible's proverbs will probably have a very clear positive benefit to your life. So you find things like this. Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank. What is this telling you? Become skilled. In fact, if you want to be before those who are genuinely in power, being good at what you do is a good tactic. So if you want to make change in the world, be good at a skill. Find yourself a skill. That's how you make your way. A wink may get you into trouble, and foolish talk will lead to your ruin. The words of a good person give life, like a fountain of water, but the words of the wicked contain nothing but violence. Again, it's a challenge to little things that we might not consider of significance or importance, but they are. This is deep, hard-won wisdom that we should pay attention to. Being good is a tactic. Apart from just having its own requirement to your life that you should be a good person for other reasons, that there is this sense in which you can produce through goodness good things. I had somebody accuse me of misunderstanding the difference between nice and good. I'm talking about good. You don't have to be nice. Maybe sometimes I'm overly nice, and that would not be good. They're not always at conflict with one another. But this is about doing things that might be unpopular, that might get you into trouble, might cause you cost. Maybe nobody sees it or appreciates it, but it is good. And there is an objective morality. There is a good. The good that we all long to exist, it does exist. I think we all know that it exists. The wise don't tell you everything they know, but the foolish talk too much and are ruined. Maybe this is a challenge to me, who's broadcasting my thoughts non-stop to hundreds of people for hours at an end. But there is a wisdom to keeping quiet. Fools say everything that comes into their mind. And I could think back to times I've said things that I've regretted. I can think of many occasions that that's happened. I can think of many cases where I've heeded this warning, bit my tongue, and been very relieved afterwards that I did so. Think of all this wisdom and the way it can affect your life if you drink it in on a regular basis. Here's one that we should feel resonate. The naive believes everything, but the sensible man considers his steps. Do we want to be the NPCs? Do we want to just plow forwards through life without a care or a thought? Do we want to be considerate people who stop and wonder, is what I'm hearing true? It's sensible, and we should consider our steps. We don't necessarily know if what we're doing is right. Spending the time to think things through is truly wisdom. How about this one, which actually resonates, well, somewhat, I would say, having this next proverb in mind gave me pause when I heard one of the other speakers who actually spoke after I delivered this last weekend. When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you and put a knife to your throat. If you are a man of great appetite, do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food. This is to say, be very careful receiving things from authorities. And actually, never more than in history, now more than ever in history, the people of the world are receiving things from authorities, left, right, and center. There's a tendency to want to get as much as you can. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but it says in this proverb, it's subtle. Consider carefully what is before you and put a knife to your throat. It's important. Think about what you're agreeing to when you deal with those who are in authority over you. Do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food. Think about why that might be in this literal proverb. Why, when sitting to dine with a ruler, might you want to be careful about taking delicacies? And how might that apply to your life? Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn to tear you to pieces. Now, this is an interesting one, which largely applies to. I would say we all have limited resources. Perhaps the obvious one is time. In the proverb, it's pearls. Economics is the study of limited resources, so we should all be familiar of thinking in these terms. You can use your resources for good, but you can also use your resources for greater good. And we need to be very judicious and careful that what we're spending our time on, our money on, is the most effective way to use those resources. And we should be concerned that doing something that's good but inefficient is like throwing pearls to pigs. It's a waste. It's a waste of something that's very precious and important. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, which are based in human tradition and the spiritual forces of the world, rather than on Christ. For in Christ all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and you have been made complete in Christ, who is the head over every ruler and authority. Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But the foolishness of God is wiser than men's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than men's strength. I think the reason I put these verses in is because we live in a culture that has enormous Greek influence, as in ancient Greek thought permeates the way that we talk, the way that we analyze the world. And it was something that the Bible was explicitly responding to. So one of the things that we are pushing back against, if we consider ourselves reactionary, I think, is the ultimate product of some of this hollow philosophy that the Bible is also picking up on. It's a lens that non-Christian thinkers won't be used to applying. But actually, Christianity, though it has a clear Greek influence as compared to Judaism, is different. It's ultimately in many ways a response or an answer to Greek philosophy. And we have a tendency in our culture to venerate the Greek way of thinking, people will be considered smart and important because they have this philosophical perspective and they can use clever words and language. But be careful that no one takes you captive through the philosophy and the empty deception, which are based on human traditions and the spiritual forces of the world rather than on Christ. We've got to watch out for philosophy. It can literally take you captive. Words is like soldiers marching up and putting you in a headlock. Greeks search for wisdom. A lot of what I've been saying probably comes across like it's great because it's wise. But what I'm really preaching is Christ crucified. And why is Christ more powerful than wisdom? Well, listen to this from Solzhenitsyn. I've spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our revolution. In the process, I've read hundreds of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and have already contributed 8 volumes of my own towards the effort of clearing away the rubble left by that upheaval. But if I were asked today to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause for the ruinous revolution that swallowed up some 60 million of our people, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat: men have forgotten God. That's why this has happened. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. So Solzhenitsyn in his life, he studied in great detail and extent and wrote copious amounts of words. But when he had to boil it all down, that awful communist system that caused so much suffering, so much evil, so much terror. And his conclusion was men have forgotten God, was at the root of it. Not men have forgotten wisdom, not men needed a sign. They needed to remember God. Let me pause and see what people have been saying in chat. Not so obvious. Don't become owned or too dependent on the fancies of authorities and rulers. Yes, I think that's an excellent summary of how we can apply the proverb about eating the rich man's delicacies. Alan Kirk is reminiscing. I used to sing a hymn at school. Jesus gives us the water of life, a classic. It doesn't immediately come to mind, but it does sound like a classic. Don't store up treasure for yourself on earth. Exactly. Aurelian says, I hope that you're having a wonderful day. Thank you. I hope, and I think I speak for all the viewers, we all hope that, Aurelian, you are having a wonderful day. Philip, so Sijin, I grew up thinking nothing of philosophy. My parents think it's kind of evil, but I love reading it now, and I like learning. Yeah. Now, you've got to be careful that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, which are based on human traditions and spiritual forces of the world rather than on Christ. There is philosophy that's based on Christ and is very good. And you can read other sources of philosophy, but just don't don't become a captive of it. Philopacrite, I think the point that Paul is making in Colossians is that you need right ordering principles or logos around which all of reality can orient itself. If it was all made through Jesus, then ... Xurian is saying, haven't had a Sunday sermon in years. This isn't technically a sermon. I'm just I'm recycling my hard work for the speech. I was thinking, I haven't actually had permission from the organizers to put my speech on my channel. But on the other hand, it's my speech and they didn't actually tell me not to. And after all, I'm totally against copyright. So feel free to take these ideas, or indeed the entire transcript of this recording, and republish it for your own purposes. As long as you don't republish it under a license that is counter to my freedoms, I'm all good with it. Charlemagne says speech. Yeah, that's the name of the stream, isn't it? I'll admit, I did not put the most work into naming the stream. All right, here's another quote. I can't remember why this is here, so let's discover together. And yet, in early democracies, as in American democracy, at the time of its birth, all individual human rights were granted on the ground that man is God's creature. That is, freedom was given to the individual conditionally, in the assumption that his constant religious responsibility, Such was the heritage of the preceding 1,000 years. 200 or even 50 years ago, it would have seemed quite impossible in America that an individual be granted boundless freedom with no purpose, simply for satisfying his whims. Subsequently, however, all such limitations were eroded everywhere in the West. A total emancipation occurred from the moral heritage of Christian centuries, with their great reservoirs of mercy and sacrifice. State systems were becoming ever more materialistic. The West has finally achieved the rights of man, and even to excess, but man's sense of responsibility to God and society has grown dimmer and dimmer. How true that is, and I've got no idea where that's from. Should I Google it? I feel bad without attributing. Perhaps somebody else can find the attribution for me. I don't think I wrote that. It's far too good. But yeah, this is a challenge to the concept that the ideas of freedom work in isolation. Even the American project, the American experiment, was very much thought of by founders as a Christian experiment. And a lot of the problems that we're running into now that we're trying to push back against, of course, are the disappearing of Christianity. So as reactionaries, we should be fully in favor of bringing back Christian values, I would argue. Let me see. The Bible can be viewed both as a spiritual text and a secular text. You can view the Bible, if needs be, as a secular text with a spiritual veneer. It makes a lot of sense still. The spiritual side of things makes it easier for people people in the past to understand. Yeah, so this is the two ways that people read my speech, I think. Christians agreed with everything I said, and non-Christians agreed with half of what I said. And the half that you're referring to, I do agree with. That there's value in the Bible even for people who don't believe it. You can use it as a moral center for society. You can use it as an individual guide and a light. However, it does also contain a challenge that has an eternal significance to each one of us. And obviously, anybody will recognize that I have a proselytizing intention when I talk that way. And I don't apologize for it. It wasn't the purpose of the conference for people to be challenged to become Christians, but I'm not going to pass up such an opportunity, am I? All right. Yes. One more quote before I get to my conclusion. This from C.S. Lewis, challenging the idea that Christians are forced to give up all of the fun, exciting, enjoyable bits of life because they're living under the yoke of a difficult moral system that restricts all of their freedoms and fun and makes life difficult. Even if it's right and good, people are like, oh, let me put off Christianity for as long as I can, the old deathbed conversion. So this quote from Lewis is intended as a rebuttal to that. If there lurks in most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and to earnestly hope for the enjoyment of it is a bad thing, I suggest that this notion has crept in from Kant and the Stoics and is no part of the Christian faith. Indeed, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of promise of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea, we are far too easily pleased. So many of us, many people in the audience here have had the experience of taking the red pill, as it's called. We're aware we've been lied to. Many of the things that we're told repeatedly by the mainstream media, by social platforms, by educational institutions, by Hollywood, by politicians, we were told this misleading story. The way the world truly is very different from what we were told. And one aspect of that lie, I would contend, is that humans can exist without a spiritual life. That we're no more than the product of a scientific process. The lie is that we can abandon God and create a better world for it. This lie is at the root of the French Revolution. It is at the root of communism, and it is at the root of progressivism. Then many of us have also taken the black pill. Simply understanding reality seems not to have given us a way to change the direction that things are heading, and we lose hope. It's a very dark place to be. As hopefully I've shown, these sentiments are to a large degree echoed by the Bible. But unlike the commentary in our circles, the Bible is extremely hopeful for two reasons. One, God can bring good out of what seems, from a human perspective, to be hopeless situations. God can bring good even out of hopeless situations. And second, there is an ultimate triumph. There's a reason to keep going. Even though everything around us might seem hopeless, we know there's this ultimate power which is beyond what evil can possibly accomplish. So if we're going to remain sane, if we're going to grow as individuals, if we're going to succeed as a community, we need true and good and hopeful ideas which accord with reality. We need things that are true, good, and hopeful. We've been given this false choice for too long. On the one hand, there's the blue pill, going back to the lies that we were told, taking, soma, right? Drugs and sex and forgetting all the things we were starting to learn about reality. And then the other choice is to confront the hopeless darkness of reality. I'm giving you a third choice. Embrace something that's truly wholesome. Something that, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn was saying, allows us to remain strong and upright even in the darkest of times. A source for a strong internal resilience, which can carry us forwards. Perhaps you won't embrace Christ as the unique solution, but in our society, which is built on Christian ideals, hopefully you can at least take the question seriously. Reactionaries, not only can we learn a great deal from the Bible, we can learn a great deal about ourselves, our history, and our culture, which we're mourning. We can learn the true cause and the true history of the problem that we're facing. Frankly, reactionaries must learn from the Bible. Like it or not, the Bible is central to our understanding, the perspectives that we hold, the thinkers that we lean upon, the thinkers that we argue against. We're all just swimming in the waters of a post-Christian society, and we're wishing to go back to the better times. But those are times when our leaders were unapologetically inspired by this source of morality, by this text that gives us a metaphysical bedrock. So I guess I ultimately want to appeal to the community, right? Reactionaries online. We're at this kind of crossroads. I can sense hurt. I can sense people are upset and worried. There's an option to lash out, to hate and to be aggressive, and it's tempting, right? We want to pay back evil with evil. But we have another option. We can be good, and we can win through individual goodness and strength. And people will hate us. So we'll have plenty of opportunities to be brave. We'll have plenty of opportunities to be courageous. And in being good, we can show our true heroic spirit. But I think it's important to say we do need to give real consideration to the truth of the Bible as more than just a tool for this life. When I hold a Bible, I really do believe that I'm holding the unique revelation of the creator of the world. There's something so much more important there. Like, go and find a Bible and think about it. Think about what it is truly claiming to be. It's more important than winning a culture war or furthering, petty individual interests. The Bible contains the guide to the true and eternal spiritual battle, the battle that every single person listening to me right now is already engaged in. Who of us would celebrate to win the whole world, but to lose our own soul? Perhaps where we should go from here is to a higher power. And God says, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you.